Welcome to the Bitcoin Policy Summit Policy Hour Special Edition IRL in Washington, D.C. with Matthew Pines and Zack Shapiro. Shout out to Zack Cohen, who is now out of a job. I'm going to host my own podcast from now on. So see you, intern. Zack, so we're in D.C. It's been a whirlwind few days. I'll give you my perspective in a second, but I'm curious to hear yours. What was your overall impression of the event here? Obviously, this is the largest event BPI has ever conducted. We definitely bit off maybe just as much as we could possibly chew, and it seems to have been a very successful effort now, and I'm proud of the whole team. BPI has really an excellent deep bench of really top performing people, and that they all kind of put a oar in the water and made this thing dramatically much more successful than I was expecting. So
yeah, I think hugely successful summit, and sort of my two takeaways. One, really internal, which is like it is incredible what the BPI team has been able to accomplish, large and small. And I think the success we had over the last couple of days is a testament to we've got a really special group of people together, and I don't know that there are really anything else analogous like that in the industry. One of the things that struck out to me the most of what happened yesterday was just the level of conversation from policymakers. You will often nowadays, because of the role that politics and policy plays in digital assets, you'll go to Bitcoin or crypto conferences and you'll hear especially elected officials say nice things about Bitcoin. We want to protect innovation. We want America to be the Bitcoin capital. And that really wasn't the tenor at all of what we heard yesterday. It was very specific policy plans. It was very nuanced discussions. And I think the policy conversation, not just within the industry, but within the government, has evolved to a level that has been slowly building over time, but I think was really on full display yesterday.
yeah, no, I had a similar take, and unfortunately, I was able to only watch like a handful of these presentations. So just like maybe some of the audience, I'm going to go back and actually watch the live stream, because I was running around and just having tons of these extremely high signal conversations with folks that I hadn't really met before, right? Folks that are coming to a Bitcoin event maybe for the first time. And these are staffers, these are policy experts inside the federal government. These are folks that work in the think tank world, but in other policy issues, spanning human rights, tech policy, AI. And they all decided to come to this event and they wanted to learn, right? It wasn't like a Bitcoin booster club or, hey, let's do Ray Raw number go up. It was, this is a new, challenging subject matter that I need to get smart on. And I think there was a hunger that obviously we suspected was the case, right? But you never quite know, right, until people show up. I think we had 900 people register for it, and that in of itself was a very strong indicator. But then the large majority of them actually showed up in suits, in 100-degree weather, in Washington, D.C., and stayed for 9 hours of pretty much back-to-back quick hit programming, 5-10-minute lightning talks, very tangible, very concrete, very direct. And my overall I was asking people like what their takeaways was, just like they were sort of almost overwhelmed with the amount of substance, right? It's like it was a lot of meat. And I think that was the objective, is sort of overwhelm people with a sense of there is a there, and it touches on all these different areas. Bitcoin isn't a niche subject matter. It's a subject matter that actually spans a huge swath of critical policy subjects, each of which almost has their own specialty areas inside DC, whether it's AI, tech policy, human rights, our geopolitical situation, how it's going to intersect with national security, traditional, focus and conversation around financial markets and capital markets and regulation. And those are each specialty areas that have their own ecosystems, their own lobbyists, their own events. And Bitcoin touches all of them. And so we're kind of pulling from each of these different communities into one event. And I think that was, and then you have that combinatorial mixing, which I think was the most valuable contribution that I really appreciated seeing, was not like what was on stage. It was what was happening back in the audience and in kind of the mixing networking areas, is just having folks from all these different disciplines and professions meeting each other and having serious professional conversations and building those relationships. Because if you're going to have Bitcoin policy, you have to have Bitcoin policy staff, Bitcoin policy subject matter experts, and BPI is a small team. So like we need to create many more versions of us and like people that kind of get what we're trying to do. And that was the thing that I took away as the most, just kind of like we now have kind of this, there's an army out there of people that are actually paying attention and hungry to learn. And then, yeah, I think on the substance, right, it was it was very useful to have some individuals like Patrick Witt up on stage, who I don't think has done a public event before. And he's one of these individuals that is, going to be very important for the future of U.S. Bitcoin policy. And he's currently wearing two hats. He's a director of the Office of Strategic Capital in the Pentagon. And his job is to essentially ensure that we can support financially the critical kind of dual use technologies that are going to be important for U.S. national security and for our economic competitiveness. And his other hat is as the deputy under Bo Hines for the President's Working Group on Digital Assets, which is in of itself an interesting kind of synthetic role, right? You're both in the Department of Defense and you're essentially Bo Hines' understudy on digital asset policy. And he articulated, I think, in a way that I hadn't heard a senior administration official talk about, like how he thinks about these issues. And it's not necessarily from like a political perspective of which bills are going to get passed, but like why is this an important issue to get right strategically? And so that was a really valuable talk. But I was just greatly impressed by the overall participation and proud of the team.
Yeah, and honestly, proud of the audience. We took a little bit of a gamble with the programming that we did not bring things to the lowest common denominator. And we actually, in terms of the content, asked a lot of our audience. Early in the day, we had a keynote from Alex Thorne at Galaxy. You'll often hear at Bitcoin conferences that Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, or it's real innovation, or the next form of money. But here, Alex took it a step further and really explained how to situate Bitcoin in historical context and to think about what this type of innovation means specifically. The panel we had about mining in America wasn't just, oh, it's great that there's a lot of mining in America and, mining is good for America. We talked about what good mining policy looks like and then asked the question, is there such thing as too much miner concentration in America? And so even in front of policymakers, we had the more nuanced conversation. I did a panel with Peter Van Valkenburg from Coin Center and Mike Mosier from Arcturus and previously of FinCEN, where we didn't just say, listen, what's happening with Tornado Cash and Samurai is bad and we need the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. We asked the further question of what does good policy look like, leveraging technology, leveraging different legal and policy frameworks. So we really did ask conceptually a lot of our audience. I think that allowed us in some ways to curate a really interesting group of people. We had almost 500 folks at the welcome party the night before. The day after, we had a day on the Hill programming that attendees were able to go to. And not only were these great networking opportunities for the folks involved, but again, it's really putting people in the right time, in the right place to forge connections that indirectly or sometimes very directly further the policy outcomes we're looking for. So, human capital is a very big part of this.
Yeah, and the other more like the thematics or the atmospherics around this is we did the summit in an environment of both geopolitical volatility and political volatility in DC. So we had just come off of the Iranian brouhaha, which I know is occupying all of the national security leadership, including the deputy director of the CIA, which we had planned on having a great fireside chat with, and I was looking forward to that. Geopolitical events sometimes outweigh commitments on schedules, but we have a great relationship now, and I think they're eager to have further conversations on this subject, which in of itself is a really interesting indicator of how the U.S. government is viewing Bitcoin as a serious policy subject to engage with publicly.
Yeah, that was one of the real themes. So there were some government officials, especially elected officials, who had very sort of nuanced policy views on Bitcoin, and they had their agendas they wanted to move forward, like the Bitcoin Act. But then there were a lot of folks, especially from the executive branch, who said to us, listen, I'm really here to listen. And they're not just listening for should we care about Bitcoin. They get that they should care about Bitcoin at this point. That was something I think that was demonstrated to us pretty amply this week. What they are listening for now is, okay, what is the nuance? What should Bitcoin policy look like specifically? And how do we best leverage this new technology for our government's interests? And it's very gratifying to see how much that BPI has become a resource for that and a center of that conversation.
Yeah, and it was kind of playing on both the yin and the yang, and both the sometimes intention policy objectives that you could lay out on the kind of the menu of options now, which is on the one hand, we view it's in the U.S. national security interest to adopt a pro-Bitcoin policy stance. We also think it's in our values interest to support open source, open networks, and allow people to freely transact. And sometimes those come at attention, especially inside Washington, D.C. And so we sort of address that tension head on, both having national security officials, folks with a prerogative, that are, it's about security first, and they represent institutions and bureaucracies that are all about control and surveillance ultimately. But ultimately they're accountable to a public that has a certain ethic and a balance between privacy and security. And then we'll bring on folks to make an impassioned case ethically and technically for things like the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act and the right to develop and use open source software and privacy tools. These are both both demonstrations of kind of the analytical depth that we're trying to bring to these sorts of events, but also the philosophical discussion, right? Like there's an ethos in Bitcoin, and as it's becoming much more geopolitically and nationally relevant, there are these tensions. And we don't shy away from those tensions. You have to address them head on. And we don't speak for Bitcoin, and so we're just trying to facilitate a conversation between all of these different stakeholders that are now looking at Bitcoin and realizing it's not going away. It's going to become even more important across all these different areas. And now these questions become live questions, and we want to make sure we're steering, the way we think is in line with what we think is the core values that Bitcoin represents.
Yeah, really impressed and gratified to see the willingness that government officials had at the summit to engage with some of those, so at times difficult heads-on questions. One of my favorite parts of the day was listening to Commissioner Hester Peirce talk passionately about the need for privacy, and yes, we need to combat illicit finance, but we can't lose sort of our American values along the way, and there is a cost to a technological surveillance dragnet. And so seeing government officials, instead of just having a talking point about, we want more and more government control as a one-way ratchet, they really are seeing sort of both sides of the argument.
If you had one private conversation, maybe you can't describe who, but that you learned or you had some sort of aha, or you had an interesting takeaway from. I know I had lots of new conversations with people that I was surprised to see there, but I'm curious to hear if you have any that come to mind.
Yeah, well, you were there for one of them. We had an interesting conversation with someone in the intelligence community about how they are thinking about Bitcoin and crypto sort of more broadly. And it's not a surprise that people in the IC are focused on disrupting especially terrorist financing and tracking international flows. But the idea that Bitcoin really can, and it seems like is starting to serve as a tool of geopolitical statecraft, not just sort of at the highest levels, but tactically, is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, that was a very interesting conversation, and it was an insight into how, at least, you always want to try to model other people's perspectives and where they sit in the bureaucracy. And other than individuals brand new to that job, right? And so it was fortuitous. This person is now coming from a slightly different career, is in this role. You have an opportunity to kind of get to know them and shape their views of this thing, because they're learning about what Bitcoin and digital assets mean for this new role, and they have a mission to execute. But it's not necessarily a concrete, fixed set of opinions, right? And I think this is a sort of the test case for why BPI kind of exists, is so that you can have a reason to talk to that person as a quasi peer and open their minds and open their eyes and actually broaden the conversation. And that's, that sort of moves the lever, I think, pretty far. I mean, otherwise conversations was, folks coming in, we had 40 volunteers. Shout out to Kenny, who recruited a whole army of volunteers who decided to, pay their own way, drive or fly, hitchhike to DC to help set up. And it was a real honor to have that kind of support from these individuals that are really dedicated to what we're trying to do here. And having just conversations with some of those folks, what's motivated them to do this, right? We created this think tank as kind of a bit of a meme. It's we just do a blog and we write some white papers and we do some policy summits and we'll see if that works. And it turns out it's working much more than I think we could have ever expected. And there's a lot of people that want to support it in whatever way they can. And they come from every background. Some are not policy people, right? But they just think this is very important to do. And that was something that I took away from there's no barrier here, right? There's no there's an in-group and an out-group, and there's a certain set of certifications and criteria. And it's no, you can basically just take anyone in Bitcoin, just make them wear a suit. Right. And then boom, you're a suit coiner, right? And it's I saw Danny in a suit, and he's a different person.
And Shinobi
in a suit. And it's funny how these like little aesthetic kind of cultural artifacts kind of set these artificial barriers in place when you think about what it means to do Bitcoin stuff in DC. And I think that's changing. I think it's one of the maybe more harder to put your finger on kinds of things that I know we're trying to contribute to is like shifting the vibe and the mindset
Right.
inside these sorts of circles. And yeah, so that was really great to hear. I guess looking forward now, so we've done the summit, we did Dan the Hill, did these like all these different discussions, a whirlwind 48 hours or so. What's next for BPI? Right? Like, what are we really going to be focusing on the rest of the year, at least from your perspective on the policy front? We've got some tactical focus areas on the legislative end, but then we also have kind of this, okay, what's the strategic direction that we're trying to push?
Right. So I think in the tactical side, all eyes are on the Clarity Act or whatever version of the Clarity Act ends up coming to the Senate. There's a sort of fierce debate right now about whether the stablecoin and market structure bills are going to be tied together. I think I've given my thoughts publicly on this a couple of times. I'm very pro something like the Clarity Act passing. If we could get them both passed at the same time, I would be in favor of it. I just don't. My sense is that's not what the politics will allow right now, and I think it is better for the industry. Let the stablecoin bill pass through. It's not the most impactful for Bitcoiners, but I think it just increases the chances that we get the protections for non-custodial devs that we need in the market structure bill. The day before the summit, I did a sort of mini day on the Hill. I went and visited a bunch of different offices in the Senate, and parts of that were reassuring, parts of that were less reassuring. It sounds like there are a lot of champions who believe in the Section 110 protections for non-custodial devs from the Clarity Act, and will make sure that there is at least an attempt at similar language in the Senate version. It seems like there's also going to be a serious headwind from senators who are going to push sort of a national security or illicit finance sort of FUD angle on the bill. And so I think we'll probably end up being pretty involved in those conversations, winning over centrist Democrats and then a non-banking committee Republicans, some of whom apparently feel like they were sort of pulled too quickly through Genius Act and might otherwise be hesitant. So there's just an education mission there, explaining what this legislation does or does not do. On the strategic end, I think one of the things that we've also seen from this experience and what we did around the Bitcoin for America event a few months back is our small events are pretty impactful as well. And I think that one of the strategic directions for BPI is to have sort of more small, intimate dinners. We're very good at getting the right people in the room, and I think that we can facilitate conversations that there are very few other organizations that are suited to facilitate those same types of interactions and facilitation. So I think probably we will do some smaller things through the end of the year, maybe some tabletop exercises, some dinners, but to really try and build our coalition. And then we had so many amazing sponsors and partners in this event, and I think there are so many strategic allies we have now where it is on us to sort of deepen those relationships and be able to extend our reach through our allies.
Yeah, and on like the substance, I've been having lots of conversations with folks. It's like, what do you think are the most important kind of around the curve areas that we need more analysis of? There's obviously the tactical legislative focus, things like the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, whether things that we can push more on the executive side, obviously support to the Bitcoin Act in Congress, BRCA, market structure. Those are very tangible, those are very tactical, those are about advocacy and education, and those are kind of in the front of our windscreens. But we don't want to just be focused just on the next 3-6 months, and sometimes politics works, sometimes it doesn't. And this is an enduring technology that's going to continue to accelerate and intersect with a lot of these other trends. And so the three that I'm paying attention to and thinking about BPI research and engagement and sort of interactions on is Bitcoin quantum computing, Bitcoin AI, especially in a potential transition through AGI, and then Bitcoin in an era of acute geopolitical rivalry, vis-a-vis U.S.-China. So quantum, AI, China. These are, I think, also topics that are going to dominate a lot of the discourse outside of Bitcoin. And I think it's our premise that Bitcoin is going to increasingly intersect with all of them. and potentially change how national policymakers would think about each of these different technological and geopolitical disruptions. And I also think it's like there's a form of strategic bandwagoning there, right? Where if you know national policymakers and capital allocators are obsessed or concerned with all three of, or any one or all three of those trends, making a case that Bitcoin's relevant to them is a way of getting them to take Bitcoin seriously in a way maybe they wouldn't have otherwise taken it seriously. I know that's how I think the vice president in Vegas was sort of articulating his views live. Is like, okay, what about Bitcoin the next 3 years is going to matter to me, right? And me as like the vice president of the United States, that I have a portfolio of responsibilities that span, the gamut here. Demonstrate to me why Bitcoin, rises to that level, right? Yeah, I agree. Bitcoin, $2 trillion asset, great. Yeah, they're going to make some donations in the political campaign, great. They'll get some attention. But why is it actually an issue that needs to rise to that level? Right. And you can't just BS that, right? It actually has to be substantive. And you have to have thought through maybe what are the policy suggestions or recommendations or the risks that you want to mitigate here. So I think those are going to be 3 areas that we're going to continue to do some, talking and thinking and engagement on. And yeah, I think, that's folks that are engaged in each of those we'll be happy to work with. I think also on the quantum side, there's already some really good efforts that are being stood up that we want to support and partner with. And yeah, it's going to take everyone to kind of participate and coordinate. I mean, the irony of Bitcoin here is that it's a leaderless, decentralized, open source software network. It was designed to solve a coordination problem in computer science, remove trusted counterparties, and there's no central point of consensus. But at the same time, Bitcoin is emerging in a global environment where these are future potential disruptions from or to Bitcoin, and everyone in Bitcoin has kind of a stake or even a take on what that's going to mean. And I don't know, I have a take, you have a take, everyone has a take. The aggregate of takes is policy, whether it's explicit or implicit. And so it's a matter of like getting those takes out on the table and sharing them with each other and debating them and arguing with them and putting them on paper. I think that's what we do as think tanks. So I'm excited to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think those 3 things are as good as any a signpost for the next season of BPI in addition to our current portfolio. And I think each have really important questions. With AI, I think sort of the 3 main issues are going to be the sort of synergy between Bitcoin mining and AI data centers. I think there's already a lot of conversation about that and activity in the industry. There's going to be the question of how AI might use Bitcoin, especially the Lightning Network, for machine-to-machine payments, and all sorts of thorny policy questions around that once you have empowered agents that are using censorship-resistant, permissionless money that presents all sorts of both opportunities and challenges. And then the Bitcoin blockchain is a source of truth to combat deepfakes. I think with quantum computing, one of the things that we are most likely to focus on is just how you achieve consensus in the Bitcoin network. We're not technical experts. We don't know when Q-Day is coming. We don't know which of the solutions right now are the best potential solutions to upgrading Bitcoin's cryptography. But I think we are well situated to sort of game out how governments and core developers and businesses will deal with that challenge. And I think coming up with a couple of potential playbooks there could be very valuable. And then with illicit finance, we're, like I was mentioning before, we're very concerned with the Clarity Act and getting protections for non-custodial developers. But what happens if things change there very quickly? And Bitcoin, as you often talk about, presents a really great opportunity to have a neutral reserve currency that embodies American values and can be helpful in the geopolitical competition against our adversaries. On the other hand, if adversaries were to use Bitcoin and there were to be some large proof of that or coming out overnight, we really would need to scramble to make sure that we have the right policy in place to deal with it and not act in a counterproductive way. So really looking forward to sort of diving deep into all of those over the next year and having those discussions in detail.
Yeah, and the way I've been sort of framing it, to try to wake people up is we are in an environment where Bitcoin's $2 trillion. I know there's a lot of folks in Bitcoin, especially folks that are engineering these new Bitcoin Treasury Company balance sheets that are potentially going to trigger a flywheel here. We'll see how stable it ends up being, but it seems clear that there's going to be an endogenous buying pressure. And we've seen, if you've been around in Bitcoin, you've seen these these dynamics play out, where Bitcoin goes from quietude and chugging along to all of a sudden it rips. Everyone in Bitcoin is happy about that. Numbers going up. You're feeling wealthy. You're feeling happy. Great. But if you're in different seats of power, if you're in seats of government, you're fundamentally looking at that like, oh, what does that mean for me, for my remit here? I'm responsible for X, Y, or Z, whether it's in national security, monetary stability, et cetera. We had economists from the White House today for a discussion, and it was, these are very smart, very capable people. They're well trained. They have well-established track records. They're learning now a lot about Bitcoin. Somewhat basic things about Bitcoin, which tells me that if we do get to a situation where Bitcoin is rapidly monetizing, there is a lot of homework that a lot of these officials are going to have to do very quickly to make good, sound policy decisions. And that's ultimately what you want. You want them to have thought about these questions early. So when I say, Bitcoin is 2 trillion, what if it's 5? What if it's 8? What if it's 10? What questions are you going to be asking yourself? What questions do you expect your boss to be asking you about those scenarios? And, I want, you to think that through. I'm happy to help you think that through. And it's better to do that now before it does happen. And I think it's inevitable that it will happen. The question is a matter of timing. And I think a lot of the folks in this administration expect to be there for the next 2 to 3 years. I think a lot of Bitcoiners expect Bitcoin to do some pretty gnarly things in the next few years. And I think we want this trajectory to be sustainable, right? And not just be a blow off top, one and done, wait out the next, AOC winter. It's a matter of establishing a bipartisan foundation, a policy framework that's aligned to the core ethos of America, our core national security interests, and also the interests of aspirant populations around the world that are, not paying attention to these debates or just using it, but may be affected by policy decisions that come out of Washington, D.C., as is the case in many cases. So that is an acute, focus of mine, and I think BPI's as well, is thinking around not just through the election cycle, but the market cycle of Bitcoin, how those two things are going to intersect, and then the policy questions that are going to become less hypothetical and much more practical and real, and this can happen quite quickly. And the analogy is obviously in the AI side. AI, the prospect of artificial general intelligence, went from being a less wrong blog post, speculative kind of fever dream, to a live scenario that is now weighing on the minds of policymakers. It sort of landed on their doorstep, and then they had to deal with it. And they had realized that it's now a salient issue in their political near horizon. And that tends to concentrate attention and focus minds. And Bitcoin hasn't yet done that yet, but I know I am preparing for the moment that it could happen, and it could focus that attention quite quickly. And how it does it matters a lot. If it's a China thing, if it's a Russia thing, if it's a Saudi thing, an Emirati thing, that's different than if it's an America-led thing. And I think it behooves us to maximize the path dependency to Bitcoin's monetization, that we're maximizing the opportunity set and minimizing the risk set here. And so I think events like this in DC are critical to that. And yeah, I don't know, final thoughts.
Look, I think it's going to be exciting times no matter what. I think this was a terrific event, and sort of just looking forward, I'm really grateful for the front row seat and the role that we have to play in this story that's going to unfold very acutely over the next decade, and probably for the rest of our lives. But probably this is where we need to wrap it.
Yeah, I've been talking probably for 8 hours, 10 hours a day for the last 3 days. So
yeah, well, thank
I'm
you
done
so
talking.
much for listening.